It's Al Haithem rerun time. Who's excited for Al Haithem rerun? Me. I'm excited for Al Haithem's rerun. All right, we're talking about Al Haithem. Who is Al Haithem? He's an on-field Dendro DPS. He is a dual scaling attack and EM character, but his EM scaling is much heavier than attack scaling. So he is primarily an EM scaling DPS. Chisel Light mirrors are Al Haithem's E skill and his central mechanic. He can have between 1, 2, or 3 sets of Chisel Light mirrors at any time. These are triggered when he does normal attacks. This is the swipe, the fidget spinner, or the sword rain. Whenever you use Al Haithem's normal attack. Chisel Light mirrors are accessed by his elemental skill, charge attack, plunge attack, or Al Haithem's elemental burst. What do I mean when I say he's primarily EM scaling? Al Haithem is a Dendro character. His real vehicle for doing damage is essentially his Dendro app. If you don't know, Al Haithem's elemental skill, Chisel Light mirrors, have a special ICD of every other hit. So since his level 3 E skill hits 3 times, he's applying Dendro once, twice, alternating. Every level 3, the level 2 will always spread once, and the level 1 will always apply Dendro every other hit. He additionally just has generally high EM value on his talent for his Chisel Light mirrors, and he has a passive that converts EM to damage percent up to 100% at 1000 EM. Now, 1000 EM does sound like a lot. If you are someone who's very heavily vertical invested, it's actually not that unreasonable to hit, which is pretty interesting. His top priority is really simple. It's E skill. Then you can level his burst and normal attack afterwards. Talking about weapons. Light Foliar Incision. This is Al Haithem's best in slot weapon. It is 100% his best in slot weapon. It gives crit rate. It gives additional EM talent value to his normal attacks and his elemental skill hits. This weapon is about 8% better than R1 Jade Cutter, which is about as good as the next best option at R5, which is the Battle Pass weapon, the Wolf Fang. Wolf Fang is the new Battle Pass weapon as of version 4.0. It is Al Haithem's best in slot 4-star weapon. What do I mean when I say 4-star weapon? We're gonna have to get to that, but it has no conditional on its damage. It has a stacking conditional that he basically maxes out almost immediately because his elemental scale hits 3 times. So yeah, this weapon's just really good on him. I mentioned Primordial Jade Cutter. I should mention it now. There are other 5-star weapons you can use as well, such as Harangi Pakufutsu, Mist Splitter, or Absolution. Al Haithem does have a lot of weapon options. However, you may struggle to find them better than the Harbinger of Dawn, Al Haithem's best in slot 3-star weapon. This weapon has an over 90% HP passive that gives you crit rate when you're above 90% HP. This weapon is very good on paper. It can be considered inconsistent in practice because anytime you get hit, you will need your Kuki Shinobu to heal you back above 90%. That is not an unreasonable thing to have as a conditional. It just means some people may not be comfortable running it, but it is a very good weapon. If you really hate using Harbinger of Dawn and don't buy the Battle Pass or don't have any other 5-star weapon, there is Iron Sting or Tokubo Shigure, but I honestly don't recommend them over Harbinger of Dawn right now. Artifacts? Artifacts are really simple. If you play Farina, yo, guess what? Mercenary Hunter, high five, is back. This is Al Haithem's best in slot. When you play the Farina, it can be 13% over his next best option, which is Gilded. Gilded Dreams is actually a bad set. What is the difference between 2-piece and Gilded Dreams? 20 EM and 14 attack percent, aka 2 EM subs or 1 crit sub. Don't farm this set unless you don't already have a Deepwood set, because Deepwood is mandatory on Al Haithem's teams, or if you have OCD or an addiction to artifact farming. It will be entering the strongbox in as of version 5.0. I just can't recommend it in good consciousness. Just use 2-piece. 2-piece has so many viable set options in Al Haithem. You can use Deepwood, you can use any of the EM sets, so Wanderer's Troop, Gilded Dreams, Flowers of Paradise Lost, or even the new-ish 2-piece E-skill damage bonus set, Golden Troop. Absolutely viable on Al Haithem. Make no mistake, 2-piece is Al Haithem's actual Farina-less best in slot set. That's just how it is. EM Sands, Dendro Goblet, Crit Circlet. You can also use an EM Circlet if you're playing with Farina and your Farina has Constellations. Before we talk about Al Haithem's Constellations, we need to talk about something a little important. Before pulling any of Al Haithem's Constellations or 5-star weapon refinements, make sure you have pulled or intend to pull Nahida C2. There is a very somewhat credible argument for pulling Nahida C2 before you even pull Al Haitham at all, which I don't entirely agree with, but it is credible enough for me to mention it. All right, now we're going to talk about Al Haitham's constellations. C1 does nothing. Best constellation in the game? No, absolutely not. Probably the worst 5-star constellation in the game for any post-release limited banner 5-star. It actually does nothing. At least Zhao C4 does something. Al Haitham C2 is 150 to 200 EM on a sliding scale. The conditional for this is 50 EM whenever he obtains a Chisel Light Mirror on a duration, and it gets refreshed each stack. So it will generally be 200 EM, but we're going to generalize to 150. It's not bad. It's actually one of his better constellations, as well as E skill +3, which is his C3, +3 E skill. It isn't as much as you'd think because of how much damage gets tied up in spread, but it's still definitely not bad. Al Haitham C4 gives him 30 damage percent at C0. At C6, he gets 30 damage percent and 90 EM. C5 is +5 burst. It's useful when we talk about C6 and when we talk about C4. Al Haitham C6, when Al Haitham uses his elemental burst, all Chisel Light mirrors will be maxed after consumption. So what does this mean in practice? It means you're gonna E plunge burst, and you're gonna swap and then swap back, and you'll have your level 3 mirrors, or you could even E swap burst and just wait on Al Haitham while his burst ticks. There is also a crit effect when Al Haitham reaches 4 stacks of Chisel Light mirrors. While this seems like it should be easy, it's actually very inconsistent in practice, and a lot of people opt to not use it. The way I would use it, if I was going to, is I would E N1 burst, charged attack, and then use this normal attack. So you use the level 2 burst instead of the level 3. A lot of people argue that it's not really worth going for instead of just cashing out your level 3 burst for more upfront damage. But yes, if you wanted the crit effect from Al Haitham C6, that's how you would use it, in my opinion. Now, Al Haitham's Chisel Light Mirrors. They're generated in 3 ways across 3 separate cooldowns. 1 mirror, 2 mirror, 3 mirror. As such, he generates 1 mirror on a charge attack and a plunge. He can also generate 1 mirror when you use his elemental skill and you already have mirrors. But when you do not have any mirrors, his elemental skill will generate 2. When you use Al Haitham's elemental burst with no mirrors, it generates 3. His burst and E skill are on an 18-second timer, and his CA plunge is on a 12-second timer. What does this mean? It means you can actually play something like a 24, 28 to 30-second rotation and use the CA plunge twice. And by separating the elemental skill and burst, you can have a lot of Al Haitham uptime across essentially separate field time instances. So you can have recurring field time. So you can treat it like 12 or 15-second rotations within your rotation. It's really interesting. The concept for this is split uptime. Split uptime management distributes Al Haitham's mirrors through 2 uptimes across 25 to 30-second team rotations. This is my most recommended way to play Al Haitham. I have a video explaining how it works, but the way you do it is you hold E, plunge, you do 2 or 3 mirror waves, you swap to a support, you use Al Haitham's burst, you can swap to a support or just wait on Al Haitham, and then you do another 3 to 4 mirror waves. That is how split uptime works. If you don't want to do split uptime, you can lead with his burst and just continue to link his level 3 mirrors. So you could do burst, 2 waves, charge attack, 2 waves, elemental skill, 2 waves, and that's easy damage. It's consistent. It's across 1 block of very long field time, so I'm not really a fan. It's also energy dependent. Energy dependency, no bueno. I don't like it. Not a fan. Don't make a character energy dependent when he doesn't need to be. Al Haitham's elemental burst can also be used to finish a wave or a chamber in a Spiral Abyss environment. This is not generally recommended, but it is something that can happen if you have an excess of damage, because this burst can do a lot of it. So you just E plunge. You can actually do 2 level 3 mirror waves and then burst with the level 3 if you're really trying to push it. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Teams. Al Haitham's teams are really simple. They are Al Haitham, Nahida, Kuki Shinobu, and a flex. That flex can be a Hydro character, it can be an Electric character. I used to be a really big proponent for Al Haitham spread. However, the best Al Haitham spread team is a Hyperbloom team now. Farina is too good of a buffer. But if you still want to play spread, spread is honestly the team that I play the most for Al Haitham, and that's just because the characters that it takes, in my opinion, are very low priority for what I seek to do in Spiral Abyss. It's essentially a free second side. You give him Kuki Shinobu, you give him Fischl, you give him Nahida, and then you have Kazuha available, you have Farina available, you have Yelan available, you have Bennett available. You have basically anyone available you can want. Really big fan of it, just to enable more options on an account. Kuki Shinobu can easily be substituted in spread teams for a few different characters. The primary examples are Dori or Zhongli or Baizhu. If you do use Kuki Shinobu or Dori, a defensive lecture character should ideally be built on 4-piece instructors and a support weapon if applicable. What do I mean by a support weapon? I mean Zyphos Moonlight, I mean Sapwood Blade, I mean Hiahaj Nasut, I mean Freedom Sworn. That's what I mean when I say support weapons. Additionally, you can actually use a defensive Dendro character, such as Kirara, Baizhu, or Yao Yao. One of the best things you can do by doing this is slot in a offensive Electro character, or a second offensive Electro character. Whether that be Beto or Yai, those are the two major options. It's competitive with the Nahida teams without requiring you to own Nahida. You can also use Lisa if you want to just get more damage out of Al Haitham himself. Can be pretty cool. What is the best Nahida-less Nilu team? Say it ain't so, but it's Al Haitham, Kirara, Xingqiu, Nilu. If you don't have Nahida and you want to play Nilu, Al Haitham's pretty fun. In my opinion, it is the best Nahida-less Nilu team. I don't know how much that really means to you, but it is something that needs to be mentioned. It can also be argued as the best single target Nilu team in general. If you do play Hyper Bloom with Al Haitham, you have 3 primary options for your Hydra character: Farina, Yelan, and Xingqiu. The priority for them kind of depends on you as a person. Farina is the best for damage. That is just a fact. Yelan and Xingqiu are similar enough to the point where I could justify recommending Xingqiu just for his defensive utility and longer uptime to get additional Hyper Blooms. It's relevant here and just instead of the damage percent on Al Haitham. That's all the information. Let's talk about some personal opinions. I mentioned earlier that there is a somewhat credible argument for having Nahida C2 before you even pull Al Haitham. I don't think it's wrong. I think it's a little short-sighted, because if you do have Nahida C2, you should probably pull Al Haitham anyway. In my opinion, Al Haitham is the best Dendro character as far as DPS. He might as well be the only on-field Dendro character. I'm sorry, Tainari and Kave, and on-field Nahida. Just because something is the best of an archetype doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, period. Nowadays, more than ever, there is an argument if someone was going to say Dendro fell off, or maybe even Dendro was never good. I don't know if I would go that far, but in my opinion, Al Haitham has the best Dendro teams in the game as far as Dendro-centric damage, including Hyper Blooms. He might not be the best DPS in the game, just by virtue of essentially how limited Dendro characters are. Dendro is limited in the elements it can interact with, and it's limited in a lot of the damage it can put out. Nahida's C2 is something that is incredibly good and highly recommended for vertical investment, just period. 20% team DPS increase is fantastic. Farina's Constellations are somewhat similar, but a bit less. If you pull a bunch of Farina's Constellations, they are collectively better than Nahida's C2 in the same teams. And Al Haitham does have a very good 5-star weapon that is a sizable increase for his damage. I still personally rate Al Haitham very highly. How much of that is because of performance without 5-star cons and 5-star weapons, versus how much of that is performance if you're willing to pull some of them, versus how much of that is performance in general, versus how much of that is due to the ease of play on an account by freeing up so many supports for another side. Doesn't really matter. Altogether, I still think of Al Haitham very highly. Do I recommend picking him up? If you are still all in on Dendro teams and Hyper Bloom in general, yes, you should get Al Haitham. Absolutely.